Hello, my name is Dr. Laura, and I'm a clinical psychologist. I co-own a group practice, and my passion is working with people who have experienced abuse and neglect in childhood and have developed trauma disorders as adults, whether that's complex PTSD or dissociative disorders. I have been doing this for a good 20 years now, and I have learned so much, both from other professionals, but also from each and every one of my clients. And as I am nearing the middle of my career, I am thinking that I would really love to share some thoughts with all of you about some of the things I've learned and some of my observations. And I'm also open to hearing your thoughts and observations, whether you are also a clinician working with clients, or whether this is personal, whether this applies to your life or people you know, or maybe even both. So, yeah, enjoy and let me know what you think. Hi. In part 3, we're going to talk about how narcissistic abuse and neglect leads to the development of PTSD starting in childhood, and how attachment, a child's attachment to their parent, can play a protective role, and when it doesn't play a protective role, why that's a dangerous thing for the child. So, catastrophic experiences of shame and humiliation, which we talked about in part 2, those experiences are by their nature traumatic. And they're going to be encoded by the brain and the body as a flashback, which will then potentially contribute to the child having PTSD. And it's a type of PTSD that can last into adulthood and through the teen years into adulthood. And and so then when the child becomes a teenager or an adult, they get diagnoses like complex PTSD, dissociative disorders, or maybe even personality disorders. As a result, these are trauma disorders that are based in childhood experiences of abuse and neglect, or that is one route to getting those disorders. So unlike traditionally understood PTSD, which is focused on one event, so let's say I get in a car accident and then I am understandably concerned about cars. I typically know if I have a flashback of a car accident, right? Because what that means is I'm vividly reliving that car accident in my mind. Okay, this kind of PTSD doesn't work that way exactly. Although a person may have PTSD flashbacks of specific times they experienced abuse and neglect. What this looks like on a day-to-day basis is that a person will have an interaction with someone else, and that interaction will remind the person of childhood experiences of being humiliated and being in a state of extreme shame and helplessness. And so what the person experiences is that these are being caused by the person in front of them. They do not think they're having PTSD. Instead, they're overrun by emotion, and depending on how they interpret it, that emotion might be primarily rage, it might be primarily shame and humiliation and a desire to hide. It depends on how the person interprets what has just happened to them. They'll likely interpret either, this person or situation caused me to experience extreme, intolerably painful feelings, and therefore I must defend against that person or situation because they caused me harm. Or the intensity of my distress is proof that I'm broken, I'm defective, and so this is just proof of my unworthiness and shamefulness. And it will, and those experiences feed into the chronic shame. So given the risk of PTSD, what makes it less likely that a child will develop PTSD when there is narcissistic abuse and neglect in the home? Well, big factor is the parents. If there is at least one parent in the home that the child is attached to, and this could be a secure or an insecure attachment, and I'll talk about more about that later. If the child has at least one parent like this, and if this parent has at least some ability to keep the child safe, at least some of the time, that is protective of the child. Sometimes what is required is that one of the parents needs to leave the home and take the child with them to protect them from the other parent. In a lot of states, including the state of Illinois, it is very difficult to keep a child from seeing their other parent, no matter how abusive one of the parents may be. And in those cases, which are heartbreaking situations to be involved in, I always tell the parents, like, look, if your child has, even if part of the time they're living somewhere where they feel safe and they're not experiencing the narcissistic abuse and neglect, it's still better for the child, even if you can't always protect them when they're with the other parent. So to return to that question, what's protective for a child who's experienced narcissistic abuse and neglect? It is also extremely protective if at least one of the parents can notice and validate the child's distress when they are experiencing abuse, and later help them to understand and process what has happened. Very often, a parent needs the support, the scaffolding of a therapist, or at least other adults in their lives in order to be the one who can talk to their child about what is happening in a way that will help their child make sense of things and have a sense of control and safety so they're less likely to develop PTSD. And I always say, while it is good for children to have therapy in these situations, what is way, way better is if at least one parent, and ideally both, can have their own therapy to address what makes them feel unsafe in the home. And so that each parent can feel safer and create a safe environment, which of course is not always possible, but is the ideal. So in the last couple of slides, I made reference to attachment. What exactly is attachment? Okay, we as human beings, along with all other mammals, are born with the need to attach to others to survive. Attachment behaviors are easily measured, starting at between the ages of 6 and 9 months, although things can affect it before then. The attachment system is activated throughout life whenever we feel vulnerable, which can mean scared, can mean sick, can mean overwhelmed emotionally. Any situation where we feel less than completely self-contained and would ideally benefit from the comfort, support, and encouragement from someone we perceive as stronger, or at least strong enough, wise, and kind. This is an attachment situation. In adulthood, this is largely about getting emotional support and getting practical help. But as you know, in infancy, getting the help of the adult or the parents is actually about survival, without which a child will not survive. There are many, many studies showing that mental health outcomes into adulthood are better for children who have a secure attachment to at least one parent. Children are able to become securely attached to parents who, on balance, that's not every time, of course, but on balance, notice with compassion when their child is vulnerable, and parents who are capable of responding in a way that helps the child feel better and feel safer if they feel in danger. So parents who have PTSD due to their own abuse and neglect as children are less likely to have children who are securely attached to them. As one example why, difficulties calming a distressed infant, which can be difficult, these difficulties can trigger flashbacks of the catastrophic shame and humiliation we were just talking about. And when a parent has PTSD and they're triggered by it, they're stuck with two bad options. Either I'm a defective parent or my child is broken. And if a parent is stuck in this binary, they're going to be distressed. They're going to be frustrated, which unfortunately is even less calming to the child involved. And as the child gets less calm, the parent gets less calm, and back and forth. And this can result at times in the parent engaging in narcissistic abuse or neglect of their child, despite even good intentioned parents who have no desire to pass that cycle on. So if a child can't securely attach to either parent, they still might be able to form an insecure attachment. The vast majority of adults have either a secure or an insecurity of attachment. I want to say 75-80% of all adults in this country, perhaps more, in the US. And so an insecurely attached child is able to have a relatively consistent relationship with their parent if they engage in certain behaviors. So some children learn to minimize or ignore their vulnerability, their attachment needs. And these children learn at very young ages. We're talking already by 6 to 9 months, not to turn to their parent when they're vulnerable. And as they learn to not turn to their parent is more likely to show up in predictable intervals. Other children do the opposite. They learn to constantly seek attention, and they never want to be separated from their parent. They cling and they get frustrated with their parent when their parent doesn't do what they want. These children will still get care, even if it's somewhat inconsistent. This is anxious attachment. Some places in the research they call it ambivalent attachment, but these two are forms of secure attachment, and not insecure attachment on the last slide. In a family where there is a significant amount of narcissistic abuse and neglect and neither parent is safe enough to turn to, a child might not be able to form a secure or an insecure attachment. Instead, the poor child is dependent on a parent who is routinely a source of shame and humiliation for the child, and so cannot meet their child's attachment needs. When this is the case, the child experiences disorganized attachment. So you can see this is a Janina Fisher's graphic from one of her flip charts. In the yellow, it says what happens when a parent figure creates safety rather than danger. And if you want to just look at the things that are inside the quotes on the left, the child feels it isn't safe to connect and to depend. Don't count on anybody and don't trust. And so that is a deeply held belief. However, another part of the child is a child and needs their parent. So they feel that inherent drive that all mammals have. I want to be close. I don't want to be alone because I'm in danger if I'm alone. And as you can see, the child is in an impossible state because it is not safe to be away from everyone and be alone, but it is also not safe to turn to their parents when they need help. And that's why we call it disorganized, because the child literally has to do two things at once, and that's impossible. And this causes significant problems, including dissociation. Yes. So when we talk about disorganized attachment, we talk about a child not turning to their parent or not wanting to because they're afraid, but the child will also not turn to a parent who is a source of shame and humiliation. And this quote from Judith Herman on shame is amazing. So she says, we see disorganized attachment where the primary attachment figure, the main parent who takes care of the child, is a source of fear, but we also see disorganized attachment when the primary attachment figure is a source of unremitting shame. In this case, the child is torn between the need for emotional attunement, on the one hand, the need for attachment, and the fear of rejection and ridicule. The child must form an internal working model of relationship in which her basic needs are inherently shameful. And I do see this, especially in some of my adults with DID, and it is a very difficult legacy. So, to the extent that a child experiences repeated narcissistic abuse and neglect and is not securely or insecurely attached to a parent who can protect them and help them understand things, they are very likely to develop PTSD and a long-term trauma disorder into adolescents and adults. Like all types of PTSD due to narcissistic abuse and neglect has intrusive symptoms meaning it has flashbacks, but there's also avoidance symptoms. And we're going to talk more about that next. Thank you for listening to part 3 of my presentation on narcissistic family systems. Please keep listening. In part 4, I'm going to talk about narcissistic defenses and narcissistic family systems.